September. A new report says there's been no overall improvement in the health of Australia's biggest river system 5 years after the Murray-Darling Basin Plan was put in place. The Wentworth group of concerned scientists says the river system is under strain, with current environmental flows falling short of set targets. The group is calling on state and federal water ministers to commit to a 1/3 increase in environmental water recovery. Well, for more on this, let's bring in the leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, David Leyonhjelm, who joins me now in the studio. Senator, thank you so much for dropping in today. What's your reading of the report today, your reaction?
I don't think they know what they're talking about.
Why not?
I led the Senate inquiry into the implementation of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan last year and the year before, and we heard lots and lots of witnesses, lots and lots of scientific evidence, lots and lots of information about how the plan was going. And the evidence we got back was that it was benefiting the environment. The environment was doing fine. In fact, there is an argument that way too much water is being put into the environment. The environment needs the right amount of water in the right places. It doesn't just need bucket loads of water all the time. And rural communities are suffering quite badly because the water rights have been bought back from agriculture, and the towns that where those farms are located as a result are suffering because of the reduced amount of business activity.
In terms of those rural communities, today's report also called for a $600 million a fund, in a sense, to help those struggling communities transition their businesses out. Would that money not be of a benefit to those communities? Transition
to what, though? I mean, transition to dust, basically, that's what it amounts to. You know, if you haven't got water in those areas, there's not much you can do. In many cases, dry farming is, you know, a fraction of the value of irrigated agriculture. And it's also unnecessary. I mean, a very large amount of that water that's sent down the river, and the river's running full all the time, so putting more water into it, how's it actually going to get down there? These so-called concerned scientists don't seem to understand. If the river's not big enough, you can't get more water down it. The river is absolutely chock full of water. The problem is, though, that a large amount of that water gets down to the lower lakes in South Australia and evaporates. It doesn't do the environment any good. Now, if it was doing something useful for the environment, I'd be the last person to criticise it, but it's not doing that. It's going down to the lower lakes and evaporating. Now, those lower lakes are not naturally freshwater lakes anyway. They would be saltwater lakes in a natural environment. What's stopping them from being natural is the barrages at the mouth of the Murray River, which are stopping the seawater from coming in. That's man-made environment, and what we're doing is taking water from productive agriculture, sending it down the river, very large quantities going into the lake where it evaporates, doing the environment no good, and it's unnecessary. That water in those lakes that evaporates could just as easily be salty water.
Senator, you mentioned the inquiry last year. There were 31 recommendations that came out of that. The government agreed to around 11 of those in various forms, taking into account definitely implement, for example. If the government looks at those recommendations and thinks only 11 really are ones that we want to take up, does that not say then that the plan that's been put in place, or the proposals that you're proposing, maybe some of those recommendations aren't seen across the board as the ones that should be implemented?
No, it's a reflection of politics. South Australia's got a whole heap of marginal seats, and there's something in the air in South Australia, some sort of virus that has convinced enough South Australians that if they don't squeeze every single drop they can out of the eastern states, they're all going to die of thirst. I mean, when you actually drill down into what is it do you think is going to happen if all that water doesn't go down to the lakes in South Australia, they don't know. They just say, oh, well, there won't be enough. Well, there's tons of water.
Is it just a South Australia problem, or are there other issues here that that are not enabling this plan or some plan to at least start shifting forward so that most stakeholders are pretty happy with the result?
Well, look, the environment is benefiting. The frogs are breeding. The birds are breeding. There's native fish, although the carp are giving them a hard time. But there are the trees are being watered. The MDBA has improved its environmental watering plans, so the water is being put in at the right times, and and some of these silly early mistakes they made about putting too much in at the wrong time and causing more harm than good, they've pretty much stopped doing that. The environment is benefiting very substantially from the extra water, but you know, the environment it's not a linear relationship. The environment doesn't just need more and more and more water. That's not how it works. It's got to be the right amount of water at the right time. Australia is an alternately a wet and a dry environment. So what we're seeing is a massive reduction in water availability for agriculture from Queensland right the way down the Darling, along the Murray River and the tributaries and the rivers that feed into the Murray. They've lost massive amounts of water because of the buyback of water rights. Now those farmers who sold that water rights, they're doing fine, but it's the rest of the community where the irrigated agriculture is no longer occurring. You have dwindling populations in those towns, loss of services, you know, no need for teachers anymore, no need for nurses, and all of those things that are happening in those agriculture-based towns. And it's unnecessary. If that water wasn't evaporating in the lakes in South Australia, and if it was salty or partly salty water that was evaporating down there, that fresh water, that good, clean, fresh water, could be used further up the system in Queensland, New South Wales and Victoria to relieve some of the pain caused by its removal.
Just finally, the report also mentioned these scientists said they were concerned about the lack of adequate monitoring of the basin plan's implementation. What do you know about the sort of monitoring of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and do you think it's adequately monitored? Do you think there's enough monitoring?
Well, I think there's a reasonable amount of monitoring goes on. The Murray-Darling Basin Authority is getting better and better at that sort of thing. I'm not sure what they're basing it on. I mean, I think the environment is being monitored to a much higher level than the socio-economic consequences. So nobody's monitoring how many jobs are being lost. Nobody's monitoring how much economic activity is being lost. But they're counting how many frogs there are. You know, I don't mind the frogs being counted, but I think it's important that that we also take account of people. We are talking about people's lives here. Livelihoods in these regional centres where irrigated agriculture has been devastated.
Senator David Leyonhjelm, really appreciate you dropping in this afternoon. Thank you so much.